Throughout modern times, our civilization has managed to survive numerous disasters of epic proportions. In the aftermath of every one of those tragedies, man's spirit has always managed to lift itself from the rubble and carry on. September 11th, 2001 was no exception. But what is it about mankind that allows us the ability to learn from such a misfortune as the bombing of the World Trade Center? The answer is simple. Others. There is a particular group of people who have become a common thread in disaster relief throughout the world in the past century. They are the people who feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, clothe the naked, mend the wounded, and console the brokenhearted. They are the people in blue, the people of the Salvation Army. A healing touch in a suffering world, and the soothing whisper of an angel's breath. Never seeking accolades, fortune, or praise, they are simply unsung. Who are they? Where do they come from? Why do they do what they do? They appear as if from nowhere, and when they've finished helping those in need, they vanish, never having asked for so much as a thank you for all of their kind deeds. In a society that bases happiness on fortune and profit, why do these people insist on giving their resources and services for free? Who are the people of the Salvation Army?
Salvation Army started in 1865 by an itinerant Methodist minister by the name of William Booth. He was the son of a nail maker in Nottingham, England, and had a poor background. Even in his early journals at 15 years of age, he said, "God shall have all there is of William Booth." In Victorian England, it was not easy for the masses to attend church. In those days, you had to pay a pew tax. You had to be at least middle class. So William Booth found that as people came to him and found the Lord, they were not accepted in the established churches. So they left the Methodist Church and began, first of all, it was called the East London Revival Society, which soon turned into the Christian Mission. This was 1865. And then in 1878, they were trying to come up with a better name to describe this movement. And William Booth had written on a piece of paper, "We are a volunteer army." And the story goes that his son, Bramwell, who became the second general of the Salvation Army, looking over his shoulder, crossed out the word volunteer. He said to his father, "I'm not a volunteer, I'm a regular," and wrote in the word salvation. So the word read, "We are a Salvation Army." And with that, the name was changed, and the nomenclature of the Army changed also, so that members of the church became soldiers of Christ. He soon found that you can't speak to someone about their soul if they're hungry, if they don't have shelter, if they need clothing, and hence the Salvation Army's social service program that is well known throughout the world now began as a means to help people and then share with them the good news of the gospel.
While women weep, as they do now, I'll fight. While little children go hungry, as they do now, I'll fight. While men go to prison, in and out, I'll fight. While there is a drunkard left, while there is a poor lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one dark soul without the light of God, I'll fight. I'll fight to the very end.
The first disaster the Salvation Army responded to in the United States was in September of 1900 in Galveston, Texas. A hurricane, which was unnamed in those days, literally destroyed the city of Galveston. 5,000 people died. And the national commander at that time sent Salvation Army officers from all over the country to Galveston to help, to bring comfort and counseling, and to help in any way they could. And through that, the national publications, national newspapers published the fact that the Salvation Army was there and appealed for funds. And that was really the beginning of the Salvation Army's disaster work. The first women to serve in the Army in a war was with the Salvation Army in World War I. The fourth general of the Salvation Army, General Evangeline Booth, went right into General Pershing's office and firmly and persuasively convinced the general that the Salvation Army should be allowed to send officers to the front lines in World War I. And hence a few young women left in New York City and ended up in tents right on the front lines, just yards and no more than a half a mile back from the front lines. And there they ministered to the men fighting, giving them comfort and prayer, reading scripture, and most importantly of all, serving donuts. So they became known as the Donut Girls, and posters went up throughout the United States urging people to support the Donut Girls who were serving on the front lines. And in a real way, that transformed the Salvation Army's image and work.
My parents were brought up in the Salvation Army, and my father, after the war, had gotten his first big job with the Salvation Army. You'll hear stories over and over how the soldiers that were in the war over in Europe, getting off the trains and they hadn't eaten or hadn't had a cup of coffee, and the Salvation Army was giving it for free. I've heard that 1,000 times.
Well, the styles change. The Army volunteers and officers, soldiers and volunteers today look quite different than the Donut Girls of World War I. And what we serve may be a little different, but basically it comes from the same motivation, and that is for no other purpose but to be there in a time of crisis, to help people in the name of Christ, without any strings attached. Just simply to be there through the love of God to help people in His name. On the morning of September 11th, Commissioner Nolan and I and our team from territorial headquarters went down to review the disaster scene. When we arrived, a fireman had just come out of the pit. He looked at me and he said, "Salvation Army, do you have some water?" And I said, "I'll get you some." And he said, "Get some for my buddy here. He needs it more than I do." So I ran around to our canteen and got 2 bottles of water, ran back, and just caught them in time. They were going back in without the water. As a Christian, I believe that nothing happens by accident. In the quiet details of life, you can see the hand of God. That's the case for this worker who found fused metal that was in the perfect shape of a cross.
I haven't seen daylight in this place. There was total darkness just a few moments ago. And lo and behold, I see 4 crosses depicting the outline of Calvary and this whole atrium. And Christ's cross was right there up front. And it really moved me. There was a good, eerie feeling. And like if you felt God reach into myself and comforting me from the sorrow of death that I had just experienced. And it moved me to the point where I just fell to my knees and cried.
So that cross is very important. It's a symbol that from these ashes will rise a stronger, a greater, more spiritually sensitive nation.
The attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon have been a travesty of human hatred that has brought our world community together. It has shown us the power of human compassion and the need that we have as people for one another.
The whole time there were people handing things out. You really didn't know where it was coming from. We just were glad to get it.
The Salvation Army was there making hot food for all the relief workers.
The first time I walked into the dome, the bubble, I was just stunned at what I saw. You know, the setup that they had, and the food was fantastic.
Folks in those canteens couldn't do enough for you. You know, what do you need? What can we get for you? If we don't have it here, we'll try to figure out where we can get it.
The counselors that were there, you know, they let us know that they were available to talk or even to pray.
Everything that was being done by the Salvation Army and the Salvationists was done to help the rescue workers do their job.
The guys would be coming down with partially melted soles. The Army would come down, the guy would sit down, they would take off the boot and replace new ones on there.
Without the comforts, without the comfort food, without the comfort clothes, without any of the comforts, they couldn't have done their job because they would have burned out so quickly.
They're true to their cause, the salvation. Without them, man might have not been so lucky at this devastation. We might have been more to the weary than less to the weary.
What if there were no Salvation Army? What if, back in 1865, William Booth had given up the fight and decided not to go on? In the event of a disaster, who would we rely on for aid? Who would the victims go to for relief and counseling? Fortunately, we don't have to answer these questions. The Salvation Army is here to stay.
When you talk about the Salvation Army, here's a bunch of people from the day I walked onto that site to this present day. Has done nothing but show me devotion, the ultimate word of love, the ultimate word of support, the ultimate word of God.
On the West Side Highway, thank God for the Salvation Army because there was nothing to eat. And you would just starve. And every time you saw that truck, there was water and there was food.
They have the dedication that they realize that they can make a difference. That's why the Army endures, is its people. And that's why I, again, say thanks for what they've done for us.
You know, you're on a cold street in the middle of the night. There wasn't anybody watching you extinguish this fire. You always could count on that there would be a Salvation Army truck fired up with hot coffee and drinks and Oreo cookies to give to the members.
Their forces are unstoppable. They get the least amount of recognition.
They're not blowing their horn. They're not sitting there putting advertisements on TV. They're just down there every day doing the job.
I don't know if God created a kind word for them, except for salvation. It's in their name, and it's an army.
You know, we're not in the business of being a slick fundraising machine or in the business of doing public relations. It's our business to serve. That's why we're the Salvation Army.
They will continue to help those in need. They will continue to offer support, resources, and counseling. They will continue to show unconditional love for their fellow man, never asking for any praise, gratuity, or recognition. They welcome their calling. They will continue to forever remain unsung.